Assalamualaikum, apa khabar semua? Okey, uh, petang-petang begini, saya cuba okey, Assalamualaikum, apa khabar semua? Okey, kali ini kita akan bersembang mengenai situasi semasa, iaitu isu-isu semasa, okey, di mana sekarang ni isu sekarang ialah lebih kepada peperangan, iaitu di mana Palestine dan Israel sedang berperang. Okey, sedang sesama mereka bergaduh disebabkan penjajahan. Okey, so yang kita tahu sekarang hari ini, di mana saya telah melihat berita di mana mengatakan mereka telah mengadakan genjatan senjata, iaitu ceasefire. Okay. So berita tu amat menggembirakan kerana semasa berlakunya peperangan ini, perang ini, di mana umat Islam menyambut hari raya. Okey. So di mana bermulanya pergaduhan itu, di mana pihak Zionis telah menyerbu Masjid Al-Aqsa dan menembak menggunakan peluru, okey, peluru getah dan juga grenade. Okey. So amat menyedihkan. So di sini saya ingin saya nak buka apa ni internet yang berkenaan dengan situasi ni. Okey, apa kata di seluruh dunia ni, apa yang mereka komen, apa semua, mereka punya feedback, apa semua kan. So mari kita lihat okey, kita lihat okey, kita tengok ini
because many people,
okey. Mari kita lihat reaction daripada warga Korea. Okey. Okey ni dia ni adalah seorang warga Korea, bloggers. So nama dia Daud. So mari kita lihat.
because many people, many innocent people are dying in Palestine. They are suffering because many people, many innocent people are dying in Palestine. They are suffering in Palestine. They have to stop. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
상황 이후 항모등 위반으로 11시 15분 현재 모든 참가자에게 인사 행사.
So itu adalah feedback daripada warga
Hello, my name is Yusuf, South Sinai Dahab.
warga Korea. Dan mari kita lihat okay, ini adalah
They are very supportive of the Palestinians.
mereka punya rabai, mereka punya apa ni Jews juga, okey, Yahudi, tapi dia bukan Zionis lah. Okey, mari kita lihat.
Clause. So let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Rabbi David Feldman with Neture County International, Jews United Against Zionism. I personally am not Palestinian, but I have many friends in occupied Palestine who are Palestinian Jews. Palestinian Jews who suffer together with the Palestinian Muslims, who suffer together with the Palestinian Christians, who suffer from the Zionist regime. It is our people who understand what suffering is. It's Jewish people who suffered at the hands of the Nazis in the Holocaust. We know what suffering is.
Yes.
I personally visited Gaza twice since 2009, since the beginning of the siege. It's unbelievable what was seen in those days. Who can imagine what's going on today? God forbid if I would be there today. I had tears in my eyes in 2009. If I would see what's going on today, it's heartbreaking, it's terrible, it's disastrous. As human beings, we should never allow this to happen in the beginning, and we should never allow this to continue so long. And as Jewish people, we say, it's so embarrassing, it's so painful when all of this is being done supposedly in our name. It's so embarrassing. It's a true desecration of God's name when all of this is being done supposedly in the name of the Jewish religion. Let me tell you, it's already for the past couple of weeks, which we hear what's going on with the settlers in Jerusalem. This is a true embarrassment, especially when these settlers look like Orthodox religious Jews. This is the worst embarrassment of our religion. And let me tell you, it was 2 weeks ago when the Agar is the anti-Zionist rabbinate of Jerusalem, representing over 100,000 Jewish people in occupied Palestine, issued a statement condemning these settler activities. But we need to clarify that it's not only the settler extremist movement that is wrong and that Jewish people condemn. It's the entire occupation, which is illegal according to international law, and is a true violation of Judaism.
Okey, itu di antara video dia. Okey. Di mana seluruh dunia telah memberi respon. Okey, mari kita lihat.
And whereas every Israeli
Bernie
life
Sanders.
matters, now
Okay.
therefore be it resolved that the
Dia ni
Senate
adalah
urges an
di
immediate
antara
ceasefire to prevent any further loss of life and further
Senator,
escalation of
kalau tak silap.
conflict in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and supports diplomatic efforts to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to uphold international law, and to protect the human rights of Israelis and Palestinians. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Senator Warren, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Kaine, Senator Carper, Senator Heinrich, Senator Murphy, Senator Merkley, Senator Ossoff, Senator Leahy, and Senator Markey for co-sponsoring this resolution. I would also like to point out that those of us who are supporting an immediate ceasefire are certainly not alone. We join with nearly the unanimous call from the European Union, with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, with Pope Francis, and with many others. In other words, all over the world, people are seeing the terrible tragedy that is taking place in the region, and they want an end to it as quickly as possible through a ceasefire. Now, I happen to have read Senator Scott's resolution, and I was particularly struck by one sentence in it on page 2. And what it says, and I quote, "The Senate mourns the loss of innocent life caused by Hamas's rocket attacks," end of quote. That's on page 2. Now, I certainly agree with that. And I think every member of Congress agrees with that. The loss of 12 innocent Israeli lives is, in fact, a tragedy. But what about the loss of 227 Palestinian lives, including 64 children and 38 women? Does Senator Scott not believe that the loss...
So dia ni di antara Bernie Sanders ni, dia ni di antara orang yang natural lah. Maksud dia di tengah-tengah. Okay. So maksud dia apa yang benda yang betul, apa yang tidak, dia akan cakap. So let's say Palestine mungkin melakukan kesalahan, dia akan nyatakan dia salah. Tapi jika Israel buat salah, dia akan mengatakan salah. So maksudnya dia ni seorang yang berkecuali lah. Maksud dia dia punya pemikiran tu bagus lah. Maksud dia kira dia akan cakap benda yang betul lah, benda yang benar kan. Okay, dia tidak macam menyokong membabi buta kan. So dia ni kira macam menegakkan kebenaran. Okay, so mari kita sambung.
Of those Palestinian lives, 64 children and 38 women, among others, is not a tragedy. I believe that we should be mourning the loss of Israeli life, but we should also be mourning the loss of Palestinian lives. Or perhaps some people think that Palestinian lives don't matter. I would hope not. And let us be very clear that when we talk about the tragedy that is now taking place in Gaza, what we are talking about is not only the terrible loss of life. As I hope most people know, Gaza, before this war, was an extremely poor and desperate community, and the latest Israeli bombardment has only made a bad situation much, much worse. Let us remember, Gaza has been under a blockade since 2007, imposed by Israel and Egypt. Most people are unable to leave. Basic necessities are extremely hard to obtain. Gaza is the home to about 2 million inhabitants. Its population density is among the highest in the world, just a huge amount of people squeezed into a very small area. More than half of the population of Gaza, some 56%, live below the poverty line. 70% of the population is receiving aid, according to estimates by the United Nations. Food rations constitute most of that aid. Unemployment in Gaza is around 45%. 48% of the population is under the age of 18, and
Any comment amat dialukan? Okay.
70%, let me repeat, 70% of the young people in Gaza are unemployed with no hope for the future. And because of this war, the bombardment from Israeli planes, the situation has gotten even worse. Today's New York Times reports that the Israeli bombardment has, and I quote, this is from the New York Times, damaged 17 hospitals and clinics in Gaza. Got that? 17 hospitals and clinics have been damaged. The bombardment has wrecked its only coronavirus test laboratory, sent fetid wastewater into the streets, and broke water pipes serving at least 800,000 people. Sewage systems inside Gaza have been destroyed. A desalination plant that helped provide fresh water to 250,000 people in the
Okey, itu adalah di antara salah satu rakyat Amerika yang begitu simpati di atas nasib rakyat Palestin. Okey. So mari kita lihat lagi. Okey. So ini adalah mereka selepas genjatan senjata tu, mereka rakyat Palestin merayakan Aidilfitri dan merayakan kira di mana mereka telah memberhentikan peperangan ni. So mereka begitu gembira, rakyat Palestin. So mari kita tepuk tangan di atas genjatan senjata ni. Yeah. Pasal untuk 2021 ni dalam keadaan negara yang kita dah di satu tamadun, okay, orang yang maju, okay, macam seluruh dunia tahun 2021 ni kira sepatutnya tidak ada lagi peperangan begini, macam pembunuhan ramai-ramai. Okay. So sekarang kita lihat image daripada satelit keadaan sebelum dan selepas. Okay.
One of the distinct features of this operation has been that Israel has targeted a number of high-rise buildings in Gaza. The Israeli military is using tanks and artillery fire, unmanned drones, and other sophisticated weapons. The Palestinian militants are firing mainly unguided rockets into Israel. So there's been quite a wide path of destruction on the civilian infrastructure and civilian homes in Gaza. Two specific towers that housed a number of media organizations, including one that housed both the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. The Israelis gave warning to the owner of the building to evacuate the building, and journalists from the AP and these other organizations had to flee for their lives before it was demolished. The Israelis have said that there were Hamas military intelligence using some offices in this building. Both the AP and other organizations have said that they had no evidence that that was the case. Gaza is territorially the size of Washington, D.C., but with a population about 3 times the size of D.C. And so you can imagine the difficulty of trying to separate civilians from anything you might be trying to bomb.
Okey, untuk kita nak memahaminya macam Gaza ni sebelum peperangan, sebelum berlakunya krisis ni, uh, Gaza ni ibarat macam penjara tau. Dia macam penjara, tapi penjara dia ni uh, dalam negara lah. Okay. So maksudnya kan Israel dia buat satu macam dinding kan, blok-blok tu. So orang-orang Palestin ni dia tak boleh keluar dan tak boleh masuk. So mereka ni di dalam ni. So di dalam ni dari segi air, dari segi elektrik, okay, dari segi perubatan, banyak segala segi lah. Okay, di mana ianya dikawal oleh kerajaan Israel. So mereka ni hidup amat-amat menderita. Okay, amat-amat menyedihkan. Pun begitu, mereka betul-betul cukup tabah lah. Betul-betul cukup kuat. Okay. So, mari kita teruskan.
Gaza. The Israeli military says that what it's been targeting is a system of tunnels used by Palestinian militants that is underneath the neighborhoods of the Gaza Strip, as well as rocket construction facilities and militant leaders that it says are responsible for these rocket attacks from Gaza into Israel. What we've found in our reporting is that a lot of civilians have died in these attacks. Israel said that they were targeting a tunnel and that the collapse of the building was an accidental result of that attack. It's a situation where there are many people, the vast majority of them civilians, who are scared for their lives and they have nowhere to run because they live in a territory that's been cut off from the outside world, and it's a very dense urban center. They are reaching further into Israeli territory, attacking Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Israelis will tell you that they are constantly hearing sirens that force them to run to their bomb shelters. Palestinian militants, they are using deadly weapons. There's no doubt about that. But they are at a disadvantage when it comes to fighting Israel, which is simply a much more powerful military. Israel has a missile defense system called the Iron Dome, which has intercepted, they
Okay, Iron Dome. Okay, Iron Dome ni adalah satu peralatan yang di mana kalau ada orang tembak, macam contoh Palestin dia tembak tu roket. So Iron Dome ni tadi dia akan menepis. Dia akan menepis tu peluru. So dia akan meletup di udara lah. So roket tu dia tak akan sempat sampai lah ke tanah. Kecuali dia termis lah. Tapi yang setahu saya dalam 95 or 90% semuanya boleh ditepis oleh Iron Dome tadi. Okay. So begitulah kehebatan peluru Iron Dome daripada pihak Zionis. Okay.
About 90% of rockets that have reached Israeli territory.
Okey, untuk benda ni kita nampak lebih adil. Okey, apa kata kita lihat keadaan Israel City. Maksud dia macam mana kehidupan di Israel dan nanti dengan Gaza, okay? So perbezaan dia tu kan.
We're Karen Nate. Yesterday, we had a super long journey from New York to our 96th country of Israel. After a slightly rough start to the trip, with Nate being sick and losing his luggage, we spent yesterday just relaxing on the beach. And by some miracle, his bag was delivered last night. Now that all that is behind us, we are super excited to get out and explore Tel Aviv.
This is a country that we've been looking forward to exploring for so long, but for one reason or another in the past it just hasn't worked out, so we are so excited to finally be here.
We are staying in the Florentine neighborhood, which is a really cool area. It has lots of street art, really cool vibes, and it's also where the Levinsky market is located, which so many people told us to go to, so that's our first stop for the day.
So ini adalah keadaan
So the Levinsky market was started back in the 1930s when several spice shop owners started opening up next to each other in this neighborhood. And today it's turned into a major spice and produce market. But what's interesting about it is they're not all housed in the same complex. It's more of just a neighborhood where all the shops on the ground level consist of spices and produce, so it gives it this super unique vibe. It's a really fun place just to come and wander the streets, and the reason everybody told us to come here is because it's like a less touristy, more authentic version of some of the bigger markets here in the city.
What goes well with ginger?
I would like apple and ginger,
Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Thank you so much. Have a great day. This place is filled with fresh produce, so we had to get a fresh pressed juice. And the streets here smell amazing. It's like a combination of citrus with spices and bakery.
Okay, mari kita
Kara realized she didn't have her transportation card, so we illegally rode one stop, and now we're back on the scooters. But we're down by the coast, and this is like the best possible place you could ride a scooter.
Until you hit these cobblestones.
So the Jaffa neighborhood is noticeably older than anything else we've seen in the city, and that's because this is the original port city that Tel Aviv grew out of.
If you haven't been able to tell by now, we love going to markets. It's one of our favorite ways to experience the local culture. And this one is so different than the first two we went to. It's a lot more like antique-y things and
Okay, setelah kita melihat benda ni, okay, so mari kita lihat pula Gaza.
My heart. All I can think about is seeing my family again. The next war is coming to Gaza. If something happens to them before I can see them, that would destroy me. You won't let me out.
Nobody's locking you up.
With an invalid passport.
Turn off the camera.
Frustrated. I'm so frustrated.
Nidal Bulbul made his dream come true, his own cafe in Berlin. His cafe is a favourite among artists in Berlin, locals and foreigners alike. Nidal has been living in the German capital for 8 years. He became a German citizen 2 years ago. Nidal was born in Palestine and grew up in the Gaza Strip.
When I was a boy in the Gaza Strip, I used to dream of having my own cafe. I wanted to open one by the beach in Gaza, but that's not possible with the situation as it is there. I didn't know my life would take me to Berlin, but now here's Bulbul, which means nightingale.
Nidal worked hard to make a new home for himself in Berlin, but the situation in Gaza has him increasingly concerned.
All I can think about is seeing my family again. The next...
Okay, mari kita langkah. Kita skip, kita tengok macam mana.
Nidal has to go back to Jordan.
Okay. Oh.
Nidal has a German passport. Will Israel recognise it and let him pass? Or, since he's Palestinian by birth, will they require a special permit to travel through Israel? He applied for a permit just in case.
So dalam video ni, dia ni asalnya daripada Palestin. Okay, so dia berhijrah ke Berlin. Tak tahu macam mana dia boleh hijrah dan menjadi rakyat Jerman. Now sekarang ni dia nak balik ke Palestin. Okay, mari kita tengok selanjutnya.
On the Jordanian side, there's no problem. They let him through with his German passport. Then he takes a short bus ride through the no man's land to get to the Israeli side. The lights of the city of Jericho in the West Bank flicker in the distance. But first he has to pass through Israel's border control. After a wait of 3 hours, he's told that Israel won't recognise his German passport. And the Israeli authorities say they never received his application for a permit to pass through the country. Nidal has to go back to Jordan.
So dalam video ni amatlah sedihnya, okay, di mana dia tak dapat balik ke negeri asalnya dengan menggunakan pasport Jerman. So amatlah menyayatkan hati, okay, di mana dia punya keluarga masih banyak yang tinggal di Palestine, di Gaza.
I don't understand this. I just don't.
Back in Amman, friends take him in. From there, he tries to obtain permission to travel to Gaza. Things are looking good, but no one can guarantee that he'll be allowed back out.
They're all saying, "You are returning. You're returning." I keep hearing that word in Hebrew, and now in Arabic too.
That means he might find himself stuck in Gaza indefinitely.
I have two choices. I can sacrifice my freedom and my entire life and take that risk so I can see my family. Then I might end up trapped there. Or I can choose my freedom, turn back, and not see my family. Those are my two choices.
So di sinilah kita lihat realiti kenyataan dia macam mana menjadi rakyat Palestin, okey, di mana dia ni pun telah menjadi rakyat Jerman dan menggunakan pasport Jerman. Sepatutnya boleh lah kan, tapi di pihak Israel tidak, Zionis tidak memberikan kebenaran. Amat-amat sedih.
When I presented my German passport yesterday, they stamped it and wrote in my Palestinian ID number. That means I could never enter this region as a German. It's absurd. In Europe, when you want to visit your family, the only decision is, do you want to fly or travel by rail?
Okay, yang ini kita hold dulu. Kita nak cari city tourist. Okay.
What's going on, shababs? We're here about my favorite ornament in the whole city. I love Gaza. Obviously, if you've seen Gaza in the headlines, it's all about wars, a year-long massacre, and a siege. But it's not all doom and gloom here in Gaza. We're spending the day to show you the best 5 things to do and the best 5 places to go while you're here. I'm standing by the beautiful coastline here in the central port of Gaza. Let me show you what you do when you come here. So things to do while you're at the port. Well, the first one obviously is to fish. Many people come here in the afternoon, they sit around the rocks and they wait patiently to catch something nice. Others take the boat to enjoy the magnificent landscape of Gaza. And if you look here at a distance is the magical Hussein Mosque. And when the adhan goes, which is the Muslim prayers, there's an amazing sense of tranquility and harmony that presides around the port. And finally, a little cheeky one, most people come here if they want a little romantic date. You bring your date, you take her here by the rocks and you enjoy some quiet time. تنص المادة 143 من القانون المدني الفلسطيني على إنه This is way too complicated, a law book. We're in the middle of the Islamic University of Gaza, a center of knowledge and power here in this beautiful city. This is called the Jerusalem building outside here. And yeah, so if you want to come have some quiet time, maybe read a book, drink a cup of tea, the Islamic University of Gaza is definitely a place to go. Little observation though, this fountain doesn't work. Please somebody fix the fountain. مين وعرفنا عليهم؟ 2 4 6 أبو العابد؟ إيه ده؟ Look at this brother. I know he looks like he's from Norway.
Dan untuk pengetahuan semua, di Palestin ni atau Gaza, dia punya rakyat bukan semuanya Islam, okay? Dia ada Kristian, dia ada banyak yang beragama lain lah, bukan semestinya Islam, okay?
He's Palestinian. أنت منين؟
أنا من فلسطين.
فلسطين؟ طب قول والله.
والله.
والله.
والله.
قول والله طب.
والله أنا انولدت في النرويج لكن لقيت في فلسطين.
حلو. أنت بتدرس إيه؟
شريعة وقانون.
شريعة وقانون؟
قانون لحال. جيد جدا وامتياز.
امتياز؟
إيه
ده؟ He's got a first class distinction but he doesn't want to talk. تعال.
من أحرى وأروع وأجمل الجامعات في العالم.
في العالم؟
في العالم.
طب قول لي كده، احنا في ناس بتتفرج علينا من اوكسفورد وكامبريدج بقى، قول لهم ان الجامعة أحلى من
لا
أوكسفورد.
الجامعة أحلى.
الجامعة أحلى؟
You beautiful, very very beautiful.
أيوة حبيب قلبي. We're here on the famous olive tree in the Islamic University of Gaza. It's not an olive tree and it's not famous, but we're gonna make it famous, baby. Here, man, I really remember my university days. There's people drawing and leaving little marks and their names on the tree. You know what I mean? So cute. And now, for the Superman move. Ooh. Gaza, do you love me? Are you riding? Aywa. We're about to go to the British graveyards. I know, sounds very, very weird, but it's really, really cool. Let's go. Yalla, Yusuf. Welcome to the Gaza War Cemetery. So the story here is that basically British officers who died in World War I, or the Great War as it's referred to, from 1914 to 1918 are buried over here. So actually most of the tombstones here specify the number, rank and name of the soldier who died. So it says here 203908, Private J.T. Brindon, Norfolk Regiment, 2nd November 1917. Now it's not only British soldiers who were buried here, but also members of the Allied forces who fought together in the war. The British government actually owns this land and pays the officials that take care of these graveyards. But a very cool fact about this that sort of reflects the cool history of Palestine is that it's not only Allied forces who are buried here, but also Egyptian and Ottoman soldiers who fought against the Allies. Let me show you, because they're buried in a separate place at the distance. Now this section is very different than the one we just saw, because everyone here is buried as a group. If you look, it says, to the honor of the following men of the Egyptian Labor Corps who are buried near the spot. 184 soldiers of the Turkish army whose names are unknown. Which is crazy, right? Because it's the same dates, 1914 to 1918. It's the same cemetery, but it's a completely different story. Almost opposite sides of the same coin. So this cemetery is close to a very densely populated area. So many Gazans, when you see them roaming around, are just here to find some peace and quiet. And it's actually my first time visiting here, and it's been a very educating experience. But what I can say is, say no to colonialism, sire. Arab money, Arab money. Obviously, I'm not Busta Rhymes, we don't have Arab money. We're not in Dubai, but we're in the golden market of Gaza, where you come here to get your bling bling and look fresh. Let's come and see. We're standing out of Yes's Gold Shop, a very old shop here in the Golden Market. We're gonna go inside, speak to the owner, and see what he says about the stuff. اسمك يا حاج؟
ياسر حبوب.
ياسر حبوب
تاجر دهب.
تاجر دهب، اهلا وسهلا بيك.
يا هلا بيك.
ربنا يخليك. انت طب ممكن تقول لنا بقى ايه ممكن نشتري ايه بتبيع ايه؟
احنا طبعا ما انت عارف يعني انت جاي محل ذهب هيبيع ايه؟ هيبيع ذهب.
ايوه.
يعني لو عايز تتجوز
نعم.
هتاخد شبكه زي دي.
تمام.
هتاخد صوره مثلا سليته زي دي.
تمام.
هتاخد خاتم مثلا. وشات. حاجات زي كده بس. يعني ممكن
جميله دي جميله.
Okey. Sesudah itu mari kita lihat keadaan sekarang. Bagaimana keadaan sekarang? Okey. Mari kita lihat.
Right now,
Okay, ini adalah yang terbaru. Okay.
I'm in the most dangerous place in all of Israel. This is the Gaza border. Right now, I am in a city called Sderot, which is the biggest and closest city to Gaza. In about the past week, just over 3,700 rockets have been sent from Gaza to Israel by a terrorist organization called Hamas. In cities around the Gaza border, all of the bus stops have bomb shelters right next to them. Come, let me show you. Where I am at right now, you have 15 seconds to run to a shelter as soon as the sirens go off. That 15 seconds is a matter of life and death. Because I am technically in a war zone, the press is asked to wear protective gear like this. This is meant to protect us from shrapnel, which are the metal pieces that come from a rocket after it explodes.
Right here is a checkpoint near the Gaza border, and these men from the IDF are guarding it. Can you tell me, why are their cars not able to go through?
Because it's too dangerous, because the Gaza Strip people throwing rockets on Israel.
Right there was rockets, and they were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome. These sirens actually did not go off because those rockets aren't as close as you think.
Okay, mari kita tengok lagi. Yang latest, Israel Hamas agree to ceasefire.
Following 11 days of intense fighting and hundreds of civilian deaths, Israel and Hamas have agreed to an Egypt-brokered ceasefire. Officials say it will take effect from 2 a.m. Friday local time. Our Kim Hyo-sun reports.
After nearly a 2-week-long battle between the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas and Israel, the two parties have agreed to a ceasefire that was brokered by Cairo. Officials say the truce will be effective from early Friday. After negotiating the ceasefire with both parties, Egypt announced that a security delegation will be dispatched both to Gaza and Israel to monitor and help stabilize the agreement.
Mr. President, allow me to share with you the fact that the efforts made by Egypt and the other parties have borne fruit with a ceasefire very shortly. We hope that it'll last. Any life that we can save warrants all of the efforts that we are making. And we're making as many efforts as possible and up to the last minute possible.
Earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's security cabinet reportedly approved the ceasefire, halting its military operations in the Gaza Strip. His office explained that the Egyptian initiative called for a, quote, mutual and unconditional ceasefire, adding that both Israel and Hamas accepted Cairo's proposal to discuss more Gaza-related issues going forward. Both sides seem to be framing the ceasefire as a victory. The decision comes after pressure from U.S. President Joe Biden that expects, quote, a significant de-escalation. The White House also explained that Tel Aviv appears to have largely achieved its military goals.
Our views, we believe the Israelis have achieved significant military objectives that they laid out to achieve in relation to protecting their people and to responding to the thousands of rocket attacks from Hamas. And so that's why, in part, that we feel they are in a position to start winding their operation.
Okay, mari kita tengok
Let's talk about Israel.
John Oliver, okay. Dia ni adalah seorang dia membuat program-program untuk macam program komedi and then dan pelbagai lagi lah. So untuk segmen ni dia bercakap tentang Israel dan Palestin. Okay, mari kita lihat. Mari kita tengok dia punya feedback.
Let's talk about Israel, because the biggest news of the week has obviously been this.
This morning, the worst violence in years between Israelis and Palestinians is intensifying. Israel's military attacked new targets in Gaza, the Palestinian territory where militants are firing hundreds of rockets into Israel. And in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, Palestinian protesters fought with police.
Since Monday, over 80 Palestinians have been killed and 7 Israelis in this tit-for-tat war.
Okay, there is a lot to unpack there, from the horror of the situation, which has escalated significantly since then, to the use of the phrase tit-for-tat war in a conflict where you just pointed out one side has suffered over 10 times the casualties. Something which speaks to both the severe power imbalance at play here and how that often gets obscured by how we choose to talk about it. And look, if you are not fluent in Middle East history, I know this can seem overwhelming. The latest chapter in a long story you haven't read. So I'm not going to try and recap the history here, or indeed propose a solution, although interestingly I do have one, because someone with this accent always thinks they can fix things in the Middle East. I redrew the map a bit and I have a lot of misplaced confidence that it would work very well. But this week's actually been a pretty good reminder that while some things are incredibly complex and require a great deal of context, others are just wrong. Take, for instance, one of the incidents that's been a flashpoint, the planned expulsion of Palestinians who've lived in the Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood for generations. It's currently tied up in the Israeli court system, with the Foreign Ministry calling it a real estate dispute. But it's worth knowing that the UN's Commissioner for Human Rights has said that these expulsions would violate Israel's obligations under international law. So it is not hard to see why sanitised terms like evictions or property disputes rankle those who live there.
You grew up in the neighbourhood, your family home is slated for eviction. What is the scene right now?
Well, thank you so much for having me. To start, it's not really an eviction. It's forced ethnic displacement, to be accurate. Eviction does not imply the hundreds and hundreds of heavily armed police and army and settlers for looting, blowing up your doors, throwing your children from your windows, and using brute force to throw you out in the street and assaulting and arrest you should you resist. It doesn't.
Okey, yang dia ni dia ni adalah rakyat Palestin. Okey, dia duduk di Sekjara, iaitu di mana tempat ni yang terbaru, yang kes terbaru, di mana penduduk-penduduk Sheikh Jarrah ni telah dihalau daripada penempatan mereka oleh settlement di mana tanah-tanah mereka, rumah-rumah mereka dirampas lah. Okay. So ini semasa dia di-interview oleh CNN.
Imply the grenades, it doesn't imply the rubber-coated bullets.
Right. The threat of eviction is accurate only in a very superficial level, in that one day you live somewhere, the next day you don't, and that change wasn't your choice. But it doesn't tell the whole story. It's like running a headline that says, Matt Gaetz reaches out to Florida youth. Sure, not inaccurate, but it's missing some pretty crucial details about the exact nature of that interaction. And look, it is true that militants from Palestinian groups like Hamas fired over 1,000 rockets towards Israel this week, and that is reprehensible. But, and I realise this is the most load-bearing conjunction in history, but the majority of those rockets thankfully didn't reach their target for a very clear reason.
The casualties and the damage would have been greater, but for Israeli interceptor rockets, the so-called Iron Dome, which blew most of the incoming missiles to pieces.
Yeah, Israel has a so-called Iron Dome, and I know, what if we blew up the rockets with more rockets? Sounds like something someone drunkenly wrote down on a napkin once, but it is a real military defense system that really works. And I also know not all the rockets were shot down. Israeli civilians were killed this week, which is terrible. But the point is, this isn't tit for tat. There is a massive imbalance when it comes to the two sides' weaponry and capabilities. While most of the rockets aimed toward Israeli citizens this week were intercepted, Israel's airstrikes were not. They hit their targets, including a house in a refugee camp, a building housing the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, and this 13-story office and apartment building. And while Israel insisted that there were military targets in that building and that they destroyed it as humanely as possible, even warning people to evacuate beforehand, for the record, destroying a civilian residence sure seems like a war crime, regardless of whether you send a courtesy heads-up text. And when dozens of people have seen their homes or livelihoods destroyed, it doesn't really help that the Israeli military posted this triumphant meme showing the explosion and the rubble labelled before and after. Look what we did. People lived there before and now they can't. You get it, right? And obviously, in general, you should probably never meme a war crime. But if you absolutely have to, at least go with something less boring than the before-after template. Maybe use the Drake meme or the disaster girl. There's a building coming down, so checkmark already there. And it's a little girl with eyes that scream, I don't know what the Geneva Conventions are, and frankly, I don't care. The more I think about it, it works perfectly.
Okay. Itu adalah daripada feedback daripada John Liver tadi. Okey, kita tengok lagi respon daripada Bernie. Okey.
Times, I should say, it's talking about the escalating.
Okey, kita tengok komen ini yang terbaru, komen oleh Pak Senator Bernie Sanders dalam rancangan ni lah. Okay.
You wrote an op-ed in the New York Times talking about the escalating violence between Israel and Gaza. This is a terrible situation. I know that President Biden reached out to Benjamin Netanyahu and urged him to de-escalate. Do you feel like that message is getting through, and do you feel like President Biden is doing enough?
I think we need an immediate ceasefire, Seth. The situation there is absolutely terrible. Just talked to somebody in Gaza yesterday. And it's not only the loss of lives, several hundred Palestinians have been killed, 12 Israelis have been killed. But in Gaza, you are talking about a situation now where people don't have electricity, they don't have fuel. They don't have clean water. Their wastewater plants have been destroyed, and fetid excrement is coming out into the streets. You have a horrible situation, and that's built on the terrible situation that existed before the conflict, where youth unemployment was 70%. So you got a total disaster there. And I think that what the function of where we should be, especially when we're giving $4 billion a year to Israel, is we should be bringing people together, not just being one-sided and say everything that Israel does is good, because it is not. Over the years, Netanyahu and his government have become much more right-wing. You have overt racists who are now part of Netanyahu's coalition. And what the United States has got to say is, look, it's a difficult situation. It's going on for decades, no magical answer. But you guys are going to have to come together and develop a long-term plan that provides dignity for the Palestinian people, safety for the Israeli people. We've got to be pro-Israel. We've got to be pro-Palestinian. But I think just being one-sided is wrong, and it is not productive in terms of bringing peace to the region.
You know, one of the things you write about, and I think on a human level, we can all agree that everyone, be they Palestinian, be they Israeli, deserves safety, deserves security, and they have a right to that. You denounced Hamas. Obviously, no one is on the side of shooting rockets into Israel. But the Palestinians have been let down by Hamas as a government. And Hamas does not represent all Palestinians in the same way that Benjamin Netanyahu does not represent all Israelis. One of the things that becomes really fraught is that when people criticize the Israeli government, it can somehow, and sometimes I should say instead of somehow, can sometimes be framed as anti-Semitic. How do we have these conversations making it clear to our Jewish friends or Jewish family that this is not anti-Semitism to be specifically critical about steps or actions that a government makes?
Well, anti-Semitism is a very serious issue, and it's a growing issue in the United States and around the world. But criticizing the government of Israel does not make you anti-Semitic any more than it makes you pro-Hamas if you talk about the terrible destruction now taking place in Gaza. Look, Trump is gone, and I hope to see a new face in our foreign policy, and that is an approach that brings the world together and understands that we got to deal with climate change. We got to get the vaccines out to poor countries around the world. We should be leading that effort. And in the Middle East, it is difficult, Seth. I mean, good people have worked on this issue for decades without success. But the current situation is unsustainable. If you have massive misery and 70% youth unemployment in Gaza, do you doubt for a second that there will be more and more unrest? So we have got to figure out a way to bring Israel and the Palestinians together.
Okay, so untuk pengetahuan anda di luar sana, dia ni adalah Bernie Sanders ni adalah seorang senator Amerika. Okay, anggota macam senat lah, something gitu. So dia ni banyak mengeluarkan bantahan lah. Maksud dia ni menyokong rakyat Palestin lah. Tapi dia ni di tengah-tengah lah. Maksud dia mana yang tak betul tu dia akan sound lah. So dia ni antara yang very very voice lantang bersuara lah untuk menentang Zionis.
Understand that Hamas is not only a terrorist organization, it is corrupt, it is ineffective, and they do not reflect, I think, the wishes of the Palestinian people. And in Israel, to complicate the problem, you have a government more and more right-wing under Netanyahu. So this is not easy stuff, but as the most powerful nation on earth, we've got to do our best to bring people together and finally bring peace to that troubled region.
I would like to stress as well, it's very easy to talk about it from behind a desk here, and I certainly don't think it's easy. And
Okay, mari kita lihat lagi di antara kira respon daripada seluruh dunia, okey, mengenai Palestine. Okey, macam mana respon keadaan. Pasal macam kita kan, selain pada kita ni, macam saya sebagai pemuzik, saya juga mengikuti keadaan semasa. Okey.
Şu haritalar gerçekleri ortaya koyuyor. 1947 yılından bugüne kadar Filistin topraklarının
Okey, ini yang terbaru adalah di mana tahun 1947 ni. So bila kita tengok map ni, ini di bangsa-bangsa bersatu dekat New York. Bila kita tengok map ni, ini yang hijau ni adalah Palestine punya tanah, land. Okay. So daripada tahun 47 jadi macam ni. Okay. So lama-lama sikit-sikit 47 and then 67 dan yang sekarang ni lah. Okay, mari kita sambung lagi.
nasıl gasp edildiğini, nasıl işgal edildiğini gösteren bir haritadır. Elbette bugün burada bulunan tüm temsilciler bu haritayı her gün görebiliyorlar çünkü bu BM çatısı altında Filistinli kardeşlerimiz sürekli olarak bu haritaları sergiliyor. Ama bu haritayı dünya iyi görsün ve 1947'den bugüne İsrail'in Filistin topraklarını nasıl çaldığını, gasp ettiğini iyi görsün ve hatırlasın.
Ini adalah wakil daripada Turki. Okey, mari kita lihat lagi perkembangan terbaru yang berlaku Okay, ini adalah kisah Palestine dead last upload before airstrike kill him. So dalam video ni adalah seorang bapa, dia buat video ni sebelum mereka kena attack dan beliau meninggal dunia terkena bom oleh jet Zionis. Mari kita lihat video dia.
طيارة خفيشة العبي خفيش خفيش خفيش خفيش خفيش خلاص تعال تعال تعال تعال تعال تعال خلاص خلاص خلاص يا سارة خلاص خلاص خلاص يا بابا خلاص. أهلا وسهلا فيكم قناة سارة وهلا ستارز. واليوم طبعا زي ما انتم عارفين اليوم 30 رمضان وبكرة العيد السعيد، كل عام وانتم بخير. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. خلاص خلاص خلاص ايش ملانا ناس. هذول العاب بسيطة بس عشان انت ما تخافيش. طيب خفيش خفيش خفيش خفيش خفيش خلاص تعال تعال تعال تعال تعال تعال تعال.
في نفس في المدنيين في دار احمر. الله اكبر الله اكبر يا رب المرحب. هاي اهم شيء يا نطلع في حد في سعار سلام. خمسة افغان واحد غاب جوا تعال جوا تعال. الناس بالاصابات والشهداء دخلوا علي اخوتي 2 شهداء. انا قاعد بصور جرائم اليهود اجت تطبق فينا في اهلنا. 2 شهداء اخوتي يا احمد ويوسف الله يرحمه. ادعوا لهم امان ادعوا لهم.
يا جماعة احنا هيك خلصنا فيديو اليوم لانه مش حنقدر نكمل معاكم. هاي صوتها، هاي صوت طيران. خلص يا بابا خلاص تخافيش. طبعا احنا اليوم خلاص بعيد طبعا احنا خلصنا هيك خلاص. يلا جماعة احنا خلصنا فيديو اليوم. طبعا سامحونا. يلا قول لهم باي خلاص.
So video ni adalah amat menyayat hati. Dahsyat. Teramatlah sedih.
To India now, where confirmed infections and deaths.
Okay. Sebelum kita menutup segmen ni, di mana segmen ni kita berborak mengenai keadaan Palestine. Okay. So untuk mereka-mereka yang di luar sana yang melihatnya keadaan ini, anda haruslah berfikir dengan hati yang terbuka, okay, di mana anda tak perlu mana yang bukan Islam, okay, ataupun yang beragama lain. Sebagai manusia, kita mesti tahu di antara yang strong dengan yang susah, okay, yang kaya, yang miskin. Di mana kita lihat kedua-dua pihak ni amat jauh beza dari segi mereka punya kekuatan, okay. Di mana macam Israel mempunyai senjata ataupun tentera yang di antara yang terkuat di dunia dan the most powerful country, and then mempunyai senjata yang canggih, okay, dan mereka pula dibantu oleh Amerika, di mana mereka mendapat dana-dana yang berjumlah berbilion-bilion, okay. So di sini kita nampak ketidakadilan, okay, di mana Palestin ni, di mana mereka ini miskin, mereka ni susah, di mana mereka punya dari segi air, dari segi electricity, daripada elektrik dan semualah perubatan, di mana mereka ni disekat tau. So benda ni kita harus amat faham dan cuba belajar baca sejarah bagaimana bermulanya pergaduhan ini, okay, di mana sebelum yang Yahudi masuk ke beramai-ramai ke Palestin, kejadian ni tak berlaku lah jika tidak ada penjajahan, okay, penjajahan dan pengambilan tanah-tanah Israel, okay. So di sini kita cuba sebagai manusia kita kena ada sifat sifat sebagai manusia lah, okay. Di mana benda yang tak betul kita harus bersuara, mana yang betul kita harus bela lah, maksud dia bila orang teraniaya kan kita harus bela mereka. Pasal kalau kita diam saja, kita takut satu hari nanti akan terkena kepada kita pula, okay. Misalnya one day tu negara kita dijajah, mungkin hari ini hari dia, tapi kita tak tahu nanti esok-esok hari kita pula, kan. So sebelumnya benda ni terjadi, kita harus bersuara lah. So di sini kita nampak hari kegembiraan mereka, di mana genjatan senjata telah pun diumumkan pada hari ini.
نحتفل الآن بهذا النصر، نحتفل الآن بهذا النصر ليسمع العالم. لماذا نحتفل اليوم؟ لماذا نخرج فرحين مبتهجين؟ لأنه حدثت متغيرات كثيرة. أراد العدو الصهيوني أن يفرض وقائع في القدس والشيخ جراح وفي بلادنا فلسطين، فانتفضت فلسطين من بحرها إلى نهرها، من شمالها إلى جنوبها، لتكون قلعة واحدة وشعبا واحدا في وجه هذا المحتل، لتقول كلنا فداء لفلسطين وكلنا فداء للقدس والأقصى.
Okay, so itu adalah kita habis di sini, okay. So di mana saya harap segmen hari ini dapat kita sharing idea, okay, di mana kita boleh selain pada kita bermain muzik, kita harus juga melihat isu-isu semasa apa yang berlaku di dunia sekarang, di mana isu peperangan Israel dengan Gaza ni, dengan rakyat Palestin, begitu juga keadaan COVID sekarang yang melanda, dan negara kita yang sekarang ni mengalami COVID. So pastikan kita mengikut SOP dan jaga diri, okay. So kita jumpa lagi di lain segmen, okay. So bye bye, jumpa lagi.